morning to Major Norzilah bin Aziz, lecturer of BED 2013 Development Economic Group A. I'm Chawi Chan with metric number 271948 from Group 2. Our group name is Together, and here is our group member. They are Muhammad Afifuddin bin Manso, Nur Ayuni binti Muhammad Fazil, Nur Hanani binti Samarni, Nantini anak perempuan Salwan, and Chen Li Ting. Today our group will talk about poverty, inequality, and development. I will talk about the measuring inequality. There are 4 components under measuring inequality, and I will explain the first and second, which is the size distribution and Lorenz curve. First, size distribution. Size distribution is the personal or size distribution of income. Is the measure most commonly used by economists. It simply deals with individual person or household and the total income they receive. The way in which the income was received is not considered. What matters is how much each earned in respective of whether the income was derived solidly from employment or came also from the other sources such as interest, profit, rent, gift, or inheritance. Moreover, the locational, urban, and rural are occupational source of the income. For example, agriculture, manufacturing, commerce, service are ignored. A common method is to divide the population into successive quantile and deciles according to ascending income level, and then determine what proportion of the total national income is received by each income group. Second, the Lorenz curve. Lorenz curve is a graph depicting the variance of the size distribution of income from perfect equality. The number of income recipients are plotted on the horizontal axis, not in absolute terms but in cumulative percentage. For example, at point 20, we have the lowest 20% of population. At point 60, we have the bottom 60%, and at the end of the axis of all 100% of the population has been accounted for. The vertical axis shows the share of total income received by each percentage of population. It also cumulated up to 100%. The both axes are the same length. The entire figure is enclosed in the square, and a diagonal line is drawn from the origin of the square to the upper right corner. At every point on the diagonal, the percentage of income received is exactly equal to the percentage of income recipients. In other words, the diagonal line in figure 5.1 is representative of in size distribution of income. The Lorenz curve shows the actual quantitative relationship between the percentage of income recipient and the percentage of the total income they did in fact receiving during, say, a given year. In other words, we have divided both the horizontal and vertical axis into 10 equal segments corresponding to each of the decile group. Point A shows the bottom is 10% of the population receive only 1.8% of the total income. Point B shows that the bottom 20% is receiving 5% of the total income. Lorenz life curve away from diagonal, the greater the degree of inequality represented, the extreme case of the perfect inequality would be represented by the congruence of the Lorenz curve with the bottom horizontal and right-hand vertical axis. The greater the degree of inequality, the greater the bend of the closer to the bottom horizontal axis the Lorenz curve will be. So that's all from my part. I will pass to my group mate Ayuni. Ayuni, you are welcome.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, my name is Nur Ayuni binti Fazil. My metric number 265203. I will continue with measuring inequality in Gini coefficient and aggregate measure in inequality. Gini coefficient is general method for measuring the income distribution, usually income inequality, and developed by statistician Corrado Gini. Gini coefficient summarizes the income distribution measured according to Lorenz curve with a figure. It measures the difference between a diagonal line and the Lorenz curve. Formula for Gini coefficient is A divided by A plus B. In Gini coefficient, an aggregate numerical measure of income inequality ranging from 0 perfect equality to 1 perfect inequality. Unequal distribution equal to 0.5 to 0.7, while equal distribution equal to 0.20 until 0.35. It measures graphically by dividing the area between the perfect equality line and the Lorentz curve by the total area lying to the right of the equality line in a Lorentz diagram. It shows the higher the value of the coefficient, the higher the inequality of income distribution. The lower it is, the more equal the distribution of income. Next, in measuring inequality by using functional distribution. Functional distribution is second measure of income distribution used by economists. It explains the share of total national income that each of the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, that have received. The theory of functional income distribution inquires into the percentage that labor receives as a whole and compare this with the percentage of the total income distributed in the form of rent, interest, and profit. You can see this figure provides a simple diagrammatic illustration of the traditional theory of functional income distribution. This figure shows negatively sloped labor demand curve. It shown by line DL. Traditional neoclassical outward sloping labor supply curve SL. The equilibrium wage will be equal to WE, and the equilibrium level of the employment will be LE. Total national output will be presented by the area O, RE, LE. This national income will be distributed in two shares, OWE, ELE, going to workers in the form of wage, and WERE remaining as the capitalist profit, which means the return to owner of capital. Income is distributed by functions such as labor wage, owner of the land, rent, and the capitalist profit. But they have a failure in functional theory, which the relevance of the functional theory is greatly diminished by the failure to take into the account the important role and influence of non-market forces such as power in determining these factor prices. That's all for me. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Nantini Selvam and my metric number is 270308. Now let's switch our attention from relative income shares of various percentile groups within a given population to the fundamentally important questions of the extent and magnitude of absolute poverty in developing countries. What is absolute poverty? Absolute poverty is the situation of being unable or only barely able to meet the substances essentials of food, clothing and shelter. In chapter 2, we define the extent of absolute poverty as the number of people who are unable to command sufficient resources to satisfy their basic needs. They are counted as the total number of living below a specified minimum level of a real income, an international poverty line. Absolute poverty can and does exist, therefore, as readily in New York City as it does in Kolkata, Lagos or Bogota, although its magnitude is likely to be much lower in terms of percentage of the total population. Absolute poverty is sometimes measured by the number or head count, which is H, of those whose income fall below the absolute poverty line, which is YP. Headcount index is the proportion of a country's population living below the poverty line. When the headcount is taken as a fraction of the total population, which is N, we define the headcount index H over N. The poverty line is set at a level that remains constant in real terms, so that we can chart our progress on an absolute level over time. The idea is to set this level at a standard below which we will consider a person to live in absolute human misery, such that the person's health is in jeopardy. Of course, they define a minimum health standard that is invariant across historical epoch is an impossibility, in part because technology changes over the time. Both are accorded the same weight when calculating the proportion of the population that lies below the poverty line. Clearly, however, the poverty problem is much more serious in the later instant. Economics therefore attempt to calculate a total poverty gap (TPG) that measure the total amount of the income necessary to raise everyone who is below the poverty line up to that line. TPG is the sum of the difference between the poverty line and actual income level of all people living below that line. Figure 5.6 illustrates that how we could measure the total poverty gap has the shaded area between poverty line, PV, and the annual income profile of the population. Even though in both country A and country B, 50% of the population falls before the same poverty line, the TPG in country A is greater than in country B. Therefore, it will take more effort to eliminate absolute poverty in country A. We can think of the TPG in a simplified way. For example, no administrative costs or general equilibrium effects are accounted for. As the amount of the money per day it will take to bring every poor person in an economy up to our defined minimum income standards. On a per capita basis, the average poverty gap, which is APG, is found by dividing the TPG by the total population. Often we are interested in the size of the poverty gap in relation to the poverty line, so we will use as our income shortfall measure the normalized poverty gap, which is NPG. NPG equals to APG divided by YP. This measure lies between 0 and 1 and so can be useful when we want a unitless measure of the gap for easier comparison. Another important poverty gap measure is the average income shortfall, which is AIS, which is the total poverty gap divided by the headcount of the poor. AIS is equals to TPG over H. The AIS tells us the average amount by which the income of the poor person falls below the poverty line. This measure can also be divided by the poverty line to yield a fractional measure, the normalized income shortfall, which is NIS. NIS equals to AIS divided by Y. A well-known poverty index that in certain forms satisfy all four criteria is the Foster-Gray-Trobeck FGT index, often called the PA class of poverty measures. Foster-Gray-Trobeck FGT is an index of a class measure of the level of absolute poverty. The PA index is the given by the figure below, where YI is the income of the I poor person, YP is the poverty line, and N is the population. Depending on the value of A, the PA index takes on different forms. If A equals to 0, the numerator is equals to H and we get the headcount ratio, which is H over N. If A equals to 1, we get the normalized poverty gap. If A equals to 2, the impact on measured poverty of a gain in income by a poor per person increases the proportion to the distance of the person from the poverty line. For example, raising the income of a person from a household living at half the per capita poverty line by say 1 penny per day will have 5 times the impact on the poverty reduction, as well raising by the same amount the income of the person living at 90% of the poverty line.
Hi everyone, I'm Chanity, metric number 270x04. Throughout this chapter, we are assuming that social welfare depends positively on the level of income per capita, but negatively on poverty and level of inequality. So why we should be concerned with inequality among those above the poverty line? Or we can say, what's so bad about extreme inequality? There are three major answers to this question. First, extreme income inequality will lead to economic inefficiency. This is because at any given average income, the higher the inequality, the smaller the fraction of the population that qualify for a loan or other credit. Because a low-income individual do not have the ability to pay back the loan. Although the rich may save a larger, but they also save a smaller fraction of their income since they will spend more. Therefore, it will influence the efficiency of the economy. Second is, it will undermine stability and solidarity. High inequality strengthens the political power for a rich and hence their income bargaining power. High inequality facilitates rent seeking, including actions such as large political donation and bribery. When resources are allocated to such rent-seeking behavior, they are diverted from productive purposes that could lend to faster growth. Even worse, high inequality makes poor institutions very difficult to improve. The third one is unfair. According to John Rostov, we can make a function for welfare, while I and P are the components have their distinct significance, and we need to consider all three elements to achieve an overall assessment of welfare in developing countries. Next, Gary Field used Lorentz curve to analyze three limiting cases of dualistic development. First is traditional sector enrichment typology. Growth results in higher income, a more equal relative distribution of income, and less poverty. This causes the Lorentz curve to shift uniformly upward and closer toward the line of equality, so inequality decreases. Second is modern sector enrichment growth typology. Growth results in higher incomes, a less equal relative distribution of income, and no change in poverty. This affects Lorentz curve to shift downward and further from the line of equality, so inequality increases. And the last one is modern sector enlargement growth. Absolute income rise and absolute poverty is reduced, but the Lorentz curve will always close, indicating that we cannot make any ambiguous statement about changes in relative inequality. It may be improved or decreased. Based on the diagram, shows that inequality increased at first and then decreased at last. Now I will present Kerzner inverted U hypothesis. The slide shows that the definition of Kerzner curve. In the early stage of economic growth, the distribution of income will tend to decrease. Only at later stage it will improve. This observation came to be categorized by the inverted U. They have some reason here, and the example of countries such as Taiwan, South Korea, Costa Rica, and Sri Lanka, we can conclude that higher income level can be accompanied by falling and not rising inequality. It all depends on the nature of the development process. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Absolute poverty, extent and magnitude. So in economic development, the critical problem of eradicating absolute poverty is one of bad news and good news. So it is extremely difficult to arrive at a tight estimate of the extent of global poverty at any point in time. So major World Bank reports issue within a couple of years of each other have provided estimate of the dollar a day headcount that differ by tens of millions of people. So this reflects the difficulty of the task itself. Here are long-run data covering the mid-1960s and the mid-1990s. So these charts reflect the well-known fact that low inequality in Asia grew rapidly and high inequality in Latin America. So while Africa grew very slowly. So it also shows that changes in inequality as measured by Gini coefficients were small within each of these regions between the 1960s and the 1990s during these periods per capita. So per capita growth in East Asia averaged 5.5%, while that of Africa declined by 0.2%. So yet both Gini coefficient remain essentially unchanged. So once again, it is not just the rate but also the character of economic growth, like how it is achieved. So who participates, like which sector are given priority, what institutional arrangement are designed and emphasized. So that will determine the degree to which that growth is or is not reflected in improved living standard for the poor. So clearly, it is not necessary for inequality to increase for higher growth to be sustained. 2010 World Development Indicators, the World Bank estimated that the number of people living in extreme or $1.25 a day poverty was approximately 1.5 billion in 2005. So this gave a head count ratio of just over 80%, reflecting the steady progress against poverty of recent years. So in 1987, over 28% of the world people lived below the same poverty line. So now the World Bank's current estimate of the trends of poverty reduction has been reported. So there has been very substantial progress in reducing the still enormous numbers of people living in extreme poverty at 1.25 per day. So the number living on less than $2 per day has remained relatively stable. So the incidence of extreme poverty is very uneven around the developing world. Households survey based base base estimates are regarded as the most accurate way to estimate poverty incidence.
Assalamualaikum and greeting to everyone. My name is Muhammad David Mangshor. My metric number is 267590. Today I will present about the regional poverty incidence in the year 2005. As we can see from the table, it shows that some survey-based poverty estimate by a region at the price $1.25 and $2 poverty lines. As can be seen from the table, poverty incidence is very high in both South Asia, with about 40% below $1.25 per day, and in Sub-Saharan Africa with 51% below. But poverty severity is far higher in Sub-Saharan Africa, with a squared poverty gap index P2 at 11.05%, far above that of South Asia at 3.64%. It's happened to at the price of $2 poverty line, which is very high in South Asia, was about 73.91%, and a squared poverty gap index at 2.242% in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the incidence of extreme poverty is very uneven around the developing world. Okay, now we are heading to poverty incidence in selected countries. The table provides estimator for some specific countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America at $1.25 and $2 poverty lines. Chronic poverty is concentrated in India, where the largest number are found, and in Africa, where the severity of poverty among the chronically poor is greatest. About 44% of India in 2004 for rural population life below $1.25 a day poverty line. In contrast, less than 36% of its urban population live on less than $1.25 per day. Meanwhile, almost 80% of India for urban population live below $2 a day poverty line, as opposed to about 66% still live at urban on less than $2 per day. So that's all from me. Thank you.